All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling the First Crusade. Why did people journey all the way to the Holy Land? What was that all about?
Yeah, it's a fascinating puzzle for sure. We've got a ton of threads to untangle: religion, politics, even personal ambition, all mixed up together.
We've got some great source material to work with, too, like a history article, which will give us a great overview. Plus, we'll dig into some primary sources, letters and diaries, that kind of thing.
Those personal accounts really bring it to life, don't they?
Totally. So, okay, picture this. Europe, the 11th century, religion is like the foundation of everything.
Absolutely.
And Jerusalem, such a crucial city for Christians, it's under Muslim rule, and the Pope, his power is growing. Big time change is brewing.
Right, and then you've got this other Christian power in the East, the Byzantine Empire. They're feeling the heat from the Seljuk Turks. I mean, these Turks, they'd already conquered Nicaea and other key Christian cities. Everyone in the West is freaking out a little.
And they turn to the Pope for help. Wow.
Yeah, it adds a whole other dimension to the situation, for sure.
So like all these tensions are simmering and bam, the First Crusade kicks off. But here's the thing, right? It's way too easy to just say everyone was driven by, religious zeal.
It was huge EE, don't get me wrong. The idea of taking back Jerusalem, the heart of their faith, I mean, that was powerful stuff for medieval Christians.
Totally. But there were other factors too, right? We've got a source, the Gesta Francorum, Gesta, meaning deeds, likely written by a soldier, and it's all about the battles, the military tactics.
It makes you think, maybe some were looking for adventure, glory, a chance to climb that social ladder.
Totally. And then, you think about how intensely pious people were back then. For some, the crusade was like a spiritual quest, a chance to wipe their sins clean, guarantee a spot in heaven. I mean, you see this in sources like Fulcher of Chartres' Historia Hierosolymitana. He was a priest on the crusade, so naturally, he focuses on that religious angle.
Yeah, those justifications for the whole campaign.
It's so interesting how those motivations could get all tangled up. Like, imagine a knight. He could be totally devoted to his faith, but also see this as a chance to win some land, maybe boost his status a bit.
Yeah.
Humans, right?
So complicated.
And that's why studying history is so cool. It's messy, it's contradictory, we got to embrace that. But okay, this leads us to a huge HE question. How do we untangle all these motivations? How do we even know what to trust?
Right. We're talking about letters, diaries. All those are going to be colored by the person writing, right? A priest's account is going to be different than a soldier's.
For sure. Or a princess, even. Take Anna Komnena's Alexiad, for instance. She was a Byzantine princess, so her focus is more on the political game, the power struggles. Totally different viewpoint than some soldier obsessed with glory on the battlefield.
Okay, so how do we deal with all these conflicting accounts? Can we even figure out the real truth about why people joined the crusade?
Well, that's the challenge for historians, isn't it? They got to weigh the biases, look at the context of each source, and even then, our understanding of history always evolves. It's like a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. So even if there's not one single answer about motivation, we can at least start to see a clearer picture.
Exactly. And the more perspectives we look at, the better we understand the First Crusade. It's not just dates and battles, it's about human nature in all its complexity.
So for you listening out there, here's something to consider. If you were suddenly transported back to 11th century Europe, what would make you join the crusade? Duty to your faith, a thirst for adventure, maybe just wanting a better life, or all of the above.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Exploring those motivations in ourselves, well, it helps us understand not just the past, but also what shapes our own choices today. It's all connected, really.
For sure. All right, let's get into some specific examples from our sources and see what else we can uncover. It's wild reading these firsthand accounts. Like, one minute you're right there with the knight in battle, the next you're inside the head of some peasant hoping for a better life.
That's the power of those primary sources. Real people, real experiences. But we got to remember what we talked about, right? They're all coming from a specific perspective.
Oh, for sure. Like that bit from Fulcher of Chartres, the priest. Remember when they take Jerusalem? He makes it sound so poetic, divine intervention, a righteous victory, the whole deal.
Totally. For him, the crusade was like God's will in action. His writing totally reflects that. But then you look at the Gesta Francorum, probably a soldier's point of view, and it's all gritty details about the siege, how clever the Crusaders were, how brave.
Like two different movies about the same thing, right? One's a religious epic, the other's a war movie. Both have good stuff, but neither tells the whole story.
Historians, they got to be like detectives, right? Taking these bits and pieces, trying to fit them together, always questioning, comparing.
And sometimes the pieces don't fit so well, like when you bring in the Byzantine perspective. Anna Komnena, the princess, she did not like the Crusaders much. Unruly, she thought. Opportunistic. Even a threat to the Byzantine Empire.
Right. Her writing shows how complicated the politics were back then. This wasn't just about Christianity versus Islam. There was all this tension within the Christian world, too, which, of course, shaped what happened.
It adds a whole other layer, right? And it makes you realize how much depends on whose voice is getting heard, whose story is being told.
100%.
Yeah.
And, you know, our understanding keeps changing as historians find new things or look at the old stuff in a new way.
Yeah.
Like, for a long time, the Crusaders were just greedy, bloodthirsty.
Yeah.
Right? Now, some historians are like, hold on, a lot of them were truly, deeply religious.
It's not so much good guys and bad guys, but human nature, right?
Yeah.
Good impulses, selfish impulses, all mixed up. And it can change over time, too.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I love history, honestly. It's not about memorizing facts. It's about trying to wrap your head around how people make decisions in crazy situations.
Okay, so we've talked motivations, we've looked at the sources, but what about the impact? This thing, it had consequences that lasted for centuries, right?
Huge turning point, no doubt. Not just for the Middle East, but for Europe, too. It wasn't just a war. It was like a catalyst. Cultural exchange, religious clashes, political upheaval, everything.
Our sources mention the Crusader states. Those were set up in the Holy Land. That must have been huge, right? Suddenly you've got these pockets of Europe in a Muslim world.
It wasn't all romantic, though. Those Crusader states, they had problems right from the start. Muslim forces wanted their land back, obviously. So you had centuries of conflict back and forth, back and forth.
Really makes you think about the long game, how war, even if it starts with good intentions, can have consequences that just keep going. And it wasn't just the Middle East that felt the impact, was it? Our sources say the Crusades changed Europe, too.
Massively. The church, their authority went way up. Like they had a new purpose, more influence, and holy war. That idea got embedded in Europe. It's like the Crusades became the model for religious expansion.
So this thing, it started as a pilgrimage to take back Jerusalem, and it ends up reshaping Europe and the Middle East. That's crazy.
And it didn't stop there. Trade, diplomacy, even ideas,
Yeah.
all of that was influenced. The Crusades opened up communication between East and West. New ideas, tech, even cultural stuff started flowing back and forth.
It's wild how something that came from such a specific situation, like literally reclaiming the Holy Land, could have these huge unintended consequences that just kept spreading.
Yeah, that's history, though, isn't it? It's rarely a straight line.
Yeah.
And what you do has consequences that often go way beyond what you planned.
So we've talked motivations, sources, and impact. Clearly, this First Crusade, so many sides to it. But as we wrap this up, what are the big lessons here? Why does this matter to us almost 1,000 years later?
That's the question, right? One big takeaway, I think, is different perspectives. The
sure.
First Crusade, it wasn't just civilizations clashing. It was a tangle of religious stuff, politics, personal desires. And we have to look at it from all those angles to understand it.
So, like historians have to grapple with all those biased sources, we've got to be smart about the information we see in our own lives. Question what we assume, look at things from other sides, and remember, there's rarely just one truth.
Exactly. That's huge, especially now. We're drowning in information. The First Crusade reminds us that history, even stuff that seems simple, it can be super complex. Got to analyze, got to be okay with nuance.
Go beyond the headlines, dig into the context, the motivations, the unexpected outcomes. And that's not just for history, is it? It's how we understand what's happening now, political arguments, even our own relationship.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The First Crusade, it's like a warning about religious extremism, how messy war is, how much impact our choices have. But it also shows how resilient people are, the power of faith, that search for meaning. It's all there.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. What stuck with you about the First Crusade? What surprised you? Did anything challenge your ideas about it? And do you see any links between this and our world today?
It's a journey, isn't it? And it doesn't end when the show's over. The questions the First Crusade raises, they stick with you. They make you think. And that's a good thing.
It's amazing, right? We've talked so much about the First Crusade, but it still feels like we've barely scratched the surface.
It really shows how deep and complex this part of history is, and honestly, that's what makes it so fascinating. There's always something new to discover, new ways to look at things, and more connections between then and now.
Absolutely. So before we finish up, let's go back and hit the main points. We started by setting the scene. 11th century Europe, super religious, Jerusalem's under Muslim rule, and the Byzantine Empire, they're getting squeezed by the Seljuk Turks.
Yeah, a time of massive change and upheaval, like the perfect recipe for something like the First Crusade to happen. And as we dug into why it happened, we saw it wasn't just a good versus evil story, or even just about religion.
Right, we talked about all those different motivations. The duty to take back the Holy Land, wanting forgiveness, maybe wanting a better life, land, glory.
And all those things got tangled up together, right? This mix of human wants and needs. We saw it in the sources, too, how each one gave a different take on what happened.
Yeah, like Fulcher of Chartres, the priest, he was writing through that religious lens, God's intervention, the good guys winning.
Absolutely. And then the Gesta Francorum, likely a soldier telling the story. Battles, strategy, bravery.
Right, and then Anna Komnena, the Byzantine princess. Her book, the Alexiad, showed us the political side, the tension between the Byzantines and the Crusaders. She reminds us that it wasn't simple. Things weren't always black and white. It was like a puzzle, right? With each source giving us another piece, and realizing that sometimes the pieces don't fit together so neatly, made us think about how we know what we know about history and how everyone's account is going to be biased.
Yeah, that's so important. And not just for historians. It's a skill we need every day. Think for ourselves, question what we hear, be open to different points of view.
We also talked about the long-term impact of the Crusade, how it led to Crusader states in the Holy Land, centuries of fighting between Christians and Muslims, and it totally changed the political and religious landscape in Europe.
Right, what you do has consequences. And sometimes those consequences are way bigger than you ever imagined. The First Crusade, it started as wanting to reclaim the Holy Land, but it ended up setting off a chain of events that lasted for centuries all across the globe.
Crazy to think about how this event almost 1,000 years ago still has echoes today. Makes you think about faith, adventure, the reasons for war, and how humans can be capable of incredible good and terrible violence.
Those are questions people are still wrestling with today, individually and as a society. The First Crusade, it reminds us how powerful ideas can be, how important it is to understand history and to have empathy and compassion as we try to navigate this world where we're all so connected.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for how complex and important the First Crusade was. It's a story full of intrigue, drama, and lessons that we can still learn from today.
And as you keep exploring and learning, don't stop asking those tough questions, challenging what you think you know, and looking for different perspectives. History, in a lot of ways, shows us both the best and the worst that humans are capable of. And by studying the past, we gain valuable insights that can help us navigate the present and create a better future. Thanks for joining us.